They say there are places in the world where silence holds a sound of its own, a resonant quiet that presses against the eardrums more insistently than any clamour. Stillwater Mere was such a place. It wasn't the absence of noise that unsettled those few who dared approach its reedy shores, but the quality of its stillness, as if the very air was holding its breath, perpetually waiting. Local whispers, never spoken above a hushed murmur, and always with a glance over the shoulder, spoke of the mere not as a body of water, but as a collector, a patient, ageless entity that gathered more than just rainwater and fallen leaves. Elias Thorne, a man whose peculiar passion lay in debunking the very folklore he so avidly collected, considered such tales to be the charming refuse of uneducated minds. He had come to the isolated hamlet bordering Stillwater Mere, not for its ambience of dread, but for a specific, almost mythical artifact, a rowboat. Not just any rowboat, but one fabled to be centuries old, crafted from a single, now extinct type of bog oak, and rumoured to lie hidden somewhere along the Mere's seldom-trod perimeter. He found it, after 3 days of methodical searching, drawn by an almost imperceptible path through the grasping reeds, tucked away in a crumbling, moss-eaten boathouse that seemed more tomb than shelter. It was astonishingly well preserved, the dark wood gleaming faintly even in the gloom, its lines elegant yet undeniably ancient. An unsettling coldness radiated from it, a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. He ran a hand along its gunwale. The wood was smooth, yet somehow felt porous, as if it had absorbed more than just time. With a grunt of effort, Elias slid the boat from its cradle of decaying timbers and into the unnervingly placid waters of the Mere. The moment its hull kissed the surface, a hush fell, deeper than before, the chirping of unseen insects ceasing abruptly. The mist, which had loitered in wisps along the far banks, began to coil and drift towards him, not carried by any discernible breeze, but moving with a slow, deliberate intent. He dipped the oars, their ancient wood surprisingly solid in his grip, and pushed off. The boat moved with an eerie grace, slicing through the mirror-like water. Each creak of the oarlocks, each groan of the hull, seemed to echo unnaturally, amplified in the profound silence. He told himself it was the acoustics of the enclosed geography, the stillness of the morning. Yet, as he rowed further from the shore, he couldn't shake the feeling that the boat sighed with each stroke, a weary exhalation that was not entirely of wood and water. He peered at the intricately carved patterns inside the hull, symbols he didn't recognize from any known folklore. They seemed almost like veins, pulsing faintly in the dim light, filtering through the mist. A trick of the eye, surely. But a new, distinct shiver, unrelated to the morning chill, traced its way down his spine. The mist thickened with an unnatural rapidity, swallowing the shoreline behind him until he was adrift in a world of pearlescent grey. It was then he first heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Not the lapping of water nor the drip from the oars. It was softer, more internal. It seemed to emanate from the very structure of the boat, somewhere deep within the ancient wood beneath his feet. Tap, 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 like a distant, unsteady heartbeat, or fingers drumming patiently from within a confined space. Elias paused, listening intently. The sound stopped. He resumed rowing, and after a few strokes it returned, a subtle, persistent cadence that burrowed into his consciousness. He reasoned it away, the wood settling, trapped air, the resonance of his own pulse in the stillness. But the explanations felt hollow, thin excuses against a creeping, primal unease. The air grew heavy, not just with moisture, but with a palpable sense of anticipation. He found himself staring at the water's surface, an unbroken, obsidian mirror. His reflection stared back, but something was profoundly wrong. The face looking up at him was his, yes, but leached of colour, the eyes wide with a stark terror he did not yet consciously feel. For a horrifying, frozen moment, the reflected lips seemed to part, to shape a silent word, a warning or a plea, before the image rippled and settled back into his own, merely anxious features. He blinked, heart hammering, convinced he was succumbing to the Mere's oppressive atmosphere. The tapping within the hull grew louder, more insistent, accompanied now by a faint, almost inaudible sighing that seemed to rise from the planks themselves. He felt a sudden, desperate urge to turn back, but an equally strong, irrational curiosity, the scholar's curse, urged him onward, deeper into the enshrouding grey. The carvings. He had dismissed them earlier as primitive, if skilled, decorative work. Now, as the last vestiges of the weak sun were choked by the fog, they seemed to take on a horrifying new dimension. In the shifting, uncertain light, the swirling patterns resolved themselves into contorted faces, human and inhuman, their mouths agape in silent, eternal screams, eyes wide with unspeakable horrors. They were not carved onto the wood. They seemed to writhe from within it, as if the very grain was composed of tormented souls. A wave of nausea washed over Elias. The boat was a sarcophagus, a floating charnel house. The cold he'd felt earlier intensified, seeping into his marrow, a profound, soul-deep despair that was alien yet terrifyingly intimate. He understood then, with a certainty that bypassed intellect and struck straight at his core, that the boat was not merely old. It was a vessel of anguish, a collector of final moments, each whisper of the wind across its timbers a sigh from a legion of the lost. The tapping was the desperate communication of those trapped, those absorbed. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through his scholarly detachment. He threw his weight into the oars, attempting to wrench the boat around, to flee back towards a shore he could no longer see. But the oars felt leaden, sinking into the water as if into thick tar. The boat resisted, not sluggishly, but with a stubborn, almost sentient will, continuing its slow, inexorable glide into the heart of the mist-shrouded mere. The grey walls of fog pressed in, suffocating, absolute. The tapping from beneath him was no longer subtle. It was a frantic, desperate drumming, a chorus of trapped things beating against their prison. And through it, a new sound emerged, a low, collective moan that vibrated up through the hull, through his feet, into the very structure of his bones. It was the sound of infinite sorrow, of hope extinguished, of countless voices subsumed into one unending lament. Elias felt a coldness that was not of the air, but of oblivion, an intimate dread that whispered of his own impending dissolution into this chorus. He fought, thrashed, even tried to stand, to leap into the chilling embrace of the water, but his limbs were heavy, his will sapped by the encroaching, despairing cold that emanated from the boat. It was as if invisible, spectral hands held him fast, pinning him to the thwart. The horrifying truth dawned with the chilling finality of a death sentence. The boat did not merely ferry its occupants across the water, it consumed them. Their fears, their final agonies, their very essence were drawn into the ancient wood, feeding its sentience, adding another layer to its grotesque tapestry of sorrow. He was not just a passenger, he was to become a part of its eternal, silent scream. His own cry died in his throat, a choked gasp swallowed by the oppressive fog and the rising chorus of the damned. Days later, when the mist briefly, grudgingly, receded from the edges of Stillwater Mere, a local fisherman, driven by a rare necessity to check his neglected eel traps, found the ancient rowboat nudging gently against the reeds. It was empty, save for a thin layer of water in its bottom, and the oars resting neatly inboard. The wood seemed darker, perhaps, richer than he remembered from the old tales. And if one were to look very, very closely at the intricate carvings within its hull, in the dim, uncertain light, one might almost discern a new face, its features twisted in a silent rictus of terror, its eyes wide with an eternity of despair, seamlessly integrated into the ancient, groaning wood. The mere itself lay still, a vast grey eye reflecting the indifferent sky, waiting with infinite patience for the next verse in its unending, horrifying ballad. And the silence it kept was pregnant with the weight of unspeakable stories, forever held within its depths and within the timbers of the boat that sometimes returned and sometimes simply waited.